In previous years, we've gone through things you can say at the Seder. We just sort of start at the beginning, and here's a perush here, a perush there. It has its worth for sure. It is available online from last year when we did this the first time ever on Zoom. So I gave 2 sessions just on the Haggadah, which means to go through. There is a vort here, there's a piece there. Perushim, they're good and they're exportable. This year is going to be a little more difficult to do that on one level, but on another level, as you'll see soon, a little later this morning, many of us on this call are actually fellow travelers for quite some time in some of the things we're going to talk about, and that means you're experts in it. I know that sounds somewhat obtuse that I'm saying it in such a roundabout way, but bear with me. We'll be there shortly. And it references some of the things that we talked about in this very slot over the course of, I don't know, many years, let's say, not even months, just even many over the course of many years. And we'll get to it. We'll get to it presently. The other piece, just by way of introduction, is this is a little bit of an unconventional shiur relative to other Haggadah shiurim that you've attended, because it is the goal of it is not to exclusively focus on brightness and light and sweetness. Someone near and dear, when they heard that the title was today Haggadah Thoughts for 5781 Experiencing the Plague, said to me, "Wow, that sounds so uplifting. You're once again talking about the plague, about pandemics and plagues and issues." Okay, it's in the air. The criticism stands, but I hope to bring some more elucidation to it. Its relationship to the Pesach Haggadah that hopefully will be somewhat relevant for people. As usual, please keep yourself muted, but if you want to speak, either put it in the chat, or for this one, it's more participatory today, feel free to just unmute yourself and sally forth. That would be totally fine today. Less lecture mode and more discursive. Okay, so here we go. The Mishnah at the beginning of Masechet Pesachim tells us the framework for the section for all of the Haggadah, but for the section of the Haggadah that we'll focus on, which is Magid, which is telling the story about what happened in Mitzrayim, or leaving Mitzrayim, and how we convey that to the next generation. We pour the second cup. V'kana ben Shoel Aviv, the son asks his father. Say children ask their parents. If the child has no idea, the child simply doesn't have knowledge. Intelligence means a young child, we'll say for argument's sake now. So then the father teaches that child. Then we have the Manishtana. And this is actually straight out of what we have in our printed Haggadahs. Note that this is instructional, and you see that still in Haggadahs today. It's in italics. And then we have the text of what's actually going to be said aloud. All right. Bit of a question if this text, the Manishtana, that's going to be recited, is actually being recited as the question that the child is asking, that here's the instruction, and here's what they should ask and how they should ask it, or if this is the child asks any question, whatever animates them. You need to start them off. Oh, here's a few starter questions. And this is the only vort I'm throwing in that's not part of the structure here. They say in the house of Brisk, of the Soloveitchik family, that actually, oh, sorry, someone cannot get into the shiur for some reason. I don't know why. Hold that thought 1 second. It's a virtual shiur room. It's the same thing every time, but someone's pinging me that they do not have access. Half a sec, everybody. Let me try to help for that. Let's see where the password might be. Sorry. Here we are. Set this in. Okay. All right. Now back to the regular scheduled programming. Sorry for that interruption. Let's go back. I don't know why it wouldn't have been working this morning for certain people, but okay. Apologies to all of them. Let's go back. In the Soloveitchik household, they actually would require someone would have to ask a question. In other words, the point was the question had to be not a boilerplate template question, but a question that actually bothered them, that animated them. So I'll look at a question today that will bother us, bothers me, and I think when I'm done, it'll bother you too. And we won't have maybe the question will be better than the answer, but there'll at least be some pathway to think about it. So according to the knowledge base of the child, whatever the child knows, so that's what the father should teach the child, right? That's the parent teaches the child. Okay. This is crucial. We begin in a deprecating manner and we conclude in a praiseworthy manner, meaning describing ourselves as on a trajectory from low to high, from being in a lowly state to being in an exalted state. And of course, we're referring to our own denigration and then to our praise of Hashem. And that's what it means, which we will say as the crux of the Seder. And that is being Doresh, to unpack, to explicate, and to bring exegesis to the words of the Parsha of Arami Oved Avi from the 26th chapter of the book of Devarim, from Arami Oved Avi until you finish the whole section. So that's part of the telling, is to actually unpack it. There are the various phases. There's the question and answer phase, and that there's a trajectory, matchil beginut, starting in denigration and ending with praise. And then there is the drasha, the going through of Arami Oved Avi, Achigmor Kol Parsha, finish the whole section of Arami Oved Avi. Of course, this Mishnah could also very easily be read, and many in fact do read it as, these aren't atomized phases. This is the manner in which all of this should happen. Questions and answers should be the interchange between the people. The questions and then the answers that come to those questions should start with Genut and end with Shvach. And how does one go about doing this? One is Doresh Arami Oved Avi until you finish the entire section. Okay, so at the beginning of, after the recitation that we have of the Manishtana, which is right here, right from the Mishnah, we have mild variations. I'm not focusing on it this year, but there's a boilerplate questions, and then we start the narration of the Haggadah itself. I didn't reproduce for you here. I say every year, the Gemara goes into describing that there are two different starting points of what constitutes denigration and what constitutes praise. This is the one of Shmuel. Shmuel holds it goes from Avadim Hayinu to the time of being taken out. In one pasuk, we learn Avadim Hayinu L'far Mitzrayim, that's the denigration, and Hashem took us out of there with a strong hand and an outstretched arm. That's the first order of business, the first line that we recite. We'll be focusing on this line for the rest of this year. Now, the end of this paragraph, if Hashem had not taken us out of Egypt, us and our children would be subjugated today to Paro and Mitzrayim, or we'd remain subjugated to Paro and Mitzrayim, even if we're all wise, we're all people of great understanding, we're elders, we know the entire Torah. It would still be a mitzvah for us to tell the story of Exodus from Egypt. And anyone who elongates in this telling, they're praiseworthy. I want to focus on this line particularly because, of course, it is actually really based on a pasuk. You know that when you read your siddur, sometimes the siddur, the Haggadah is no different in this regard, quotes a direct pasuk. Sometimes the writers of the siddur, means the Chachamim who organized it, and sometimes the writers of the Haggadah, they will add in a word, they'll change a word, they'll change the tense of a word in order to make it fit with the flow of whatever that tefillah might be. You can find it in many of the Siddurim, it'll say, when it has the footnote, instead of just quoting where the pasuk is from, it'll say CF period, and it'll tell you that it's a variation actually of what appeared in that, whatever that pasuk was, right? So a CF compare with, right? So, it means look at that work in Tanakh, and you'll see that it's a variant of that pasuk. So here we have this pasuk actually appears right here in the book of Dvarim in the 6th chapter. We were slaves to power in Egypt. So this pasuk, which matches what we have here as the response, as it happens, is a pasuk from one of the sections of the 4 sons. When your son will ask you tomorrow, meaning on the morrow, meaning in the future, saying, what are the testimonies, what are the edicts and the statutes, which Hashem, our God, has commanded you, you shall say to your child. If we wanted to edit it, not that the Torah needs my editing, could have put a colon in there. Here's what you say to your child. We were slaves to Paro in Egypt, right? That's what you tell your child. Hashem gave great signs to them and terrible signs against them, against Egypt, Paro, his whole household, to our eyes. He took us out of there. He took us out of this place. From there, rather, Hashem commanded us to keep all of these edicts, to fear Hashem, our God, for our benefit, all of our days, and to sustain us until this day. And it will be considered righteousness for us when we will keep to uphold all of the mitzvah, these mitzvot, which before Hashem, our God, as he has commanded us. Do you remember offhand, anyone want to volunteer? Which of the 4 sons is this? You can put it in the chat or unmute yourself and just shout it out. Any recollection?
Isn't that the wise son?
Yes, the wise son. So right here, you're already up to, I said this year's not going to be a lot of different little Divrei Torah, but now we're up to 2 little Divrei Torah, if not the 3rd one, which is, what is Avad Haminu L'Far Mitzrayim? My child, no matter who you are, if you're listening to this, you're really a chacham, don't worry. Because this is the question later on for the one we call the Ben HaChacham. And what's the answer? You give the Ben HaChacham. You open with Avad Haminu L'Far Mitzrayim, Mitzrayim Be'al Chazaka. What do you have here? Yeah? Good? Here's the problem. Why was it necessary to add in these 2 words? What are they doing here? Why do we also need Vizro and Atuya? It doesn't say Vizro and Atuya here. Not to the end of the Parsha. But it is here. You say, on the face of it, this is a minor detail. I don't know. It's like the florid style of the Baal Haggadah was to add in a couple of words here or there. But wait a minute. If I'm making a point that these are literally the words out of this pasuk, then doesn't this seem a little bit extraneous? Our contention generally when we learn Torah Shebichtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh, is that words are not extraneous. There's a reason why various expressions are included. In fact, this expression, Biyad Chazak of Yisro and Atuya, does appear together. Where? Right here, in the section we call Arami Oved Avi. You will recall that I mentioned a few minutes ago, as we're cycling through the Haggadah, we get to a section where we sing V'hisha Amda, then we say, Tzei Ulamad, go see what Lavan tried to do, etc. Then we say, and we start quoting from this pasuk, Arami Oved Avi, which is variously understood as an Aramean tried to destroy my forefather, or a wandering Aramean was my forefather. This is meant to be, this is the section then that was mentioned back in the Mishnah as you have to be Doresh, this parsha. Means we have to explain it. That was up on the top here. V'doresh miravid Oved Ad Shir Yigor Kol Parsha Kula, right? So we finish it. Now, as we're doing that, we actually have a quotation. Now it has extra words here, which don't appear on the top. But at least we have the notion of Biyad Chazaka V'Zro Natuya up here and Biyad Chazaka V'Zro Natuya down here. There somehow seems to be a relationship between them, at least because the expressions go together. We're accustomed to putting them together. Again, you shrug your shoulders and say, well, Biyad Chazaka, it is what it is, because it's part of the pasuk. V'Zro Natuya, just sort of went along with it. But that would make it somewhat arbitrary. And in fact, many of the earliest manuscripts already have V'Zro and Atuya. So what's it doing there, right? So perhaps it's an amalgamation. This first pasuk, the first line, it's not a pasuk anymore once it's in the Haggadah. This first line might be an amalgamation of 2 themes. One, of the answer to the child, the interrogative component, the question, now the answer. And then underneath it is already the mention and the drasha of at least the words taken out of the notion of Vayotzienu Hashem Mitzrayim B'Yad Chazaka. You have Vayotzienu Hashem Elokeinu Misham B'Yad Chazaka, which is more approximating of the pasuk you say to the wise child. Right? That's over here. Should have underlined it much earlier in this year. And maybe that follows very nicely with the child asks, then the parent answers. You're matchil begnut Messiah b'shvach. and your Doresh from Rabbi Ovid Avi until you finish all the parsha. Well, isn't that contained right in here? This first part is actually the section of the answer to the child. And then this section, at least the words, some of the words, you could take Vayotzienu Hashem, and you could take Biyad Chazak of Yisrael and say, and that's like an amalgamation with a Rami Ovid Avi. You follow? It's two things going on, and the two themes are interwoven with each other, interlaced, just as they are in the Mishnah. But there's another layer of what's going on here. If we look later on in the Haggadah, when it comes time to explain these lines, God took us out of Egypt. You'll see in many Haggadahs, these words are either in red, or they're bolded, or they're in a larger font, because we go through, after we start this section, we go through literally verse by verse, line by line, and start unpacking. What do these words mean? And then we have a sentence. What do these words mean? Then a sentence. This is what's being unpacked, the section of Rami Ovid Avi. What's So we should know God did it. Wasn't an angel, wasn't a saraf, wasn't another kind of shaliach. Hashem did it himself. As the pasuk teaches, I will pass through all of Egypt on this night, and I will strike the firstborn, etc., right? And then this, truth to tell, should really be indented, because it's actually more appropriately explaining these words now. Follow? Does it make sense? It should really be indented. Here, it's still a work in progress while we're going. All these words, V'avarti b'eretz Mitzrayim, b'layla hazeh, b'avarti b'eretz Mitzrayim b'layla hazeh, v'yikei go b'chor. You got the idea. Look what happens for Biyad Chazaka. Biyad Chazaka, zo hadever. It's the plague. K'mas shenemar, as it says, with regard to the Makkah of Dever, Hinei yad Hashem hoya b'miknecha shebastadeh. Behold, the hand of God is striking, basically is present upon your livestock, which is in the field, the horses, the donkeys, the camels, the cattle, the livestock. Dever kaved me'od will be a very, very heavy plague. May I ask, Yad Chazaka is Dever. You know why? Because it mentioned here Yad Hashem. So it's when it says the hand of God, what's the best expression of the hand of God? The first time we have it in the section of the Makot, it's Yad Hashem of Dever. But the Netziva Volozhin, in his Haggadah Imrei Shefer, says this cannot be from the 10 plagues, this Dever. It just can't be. Why are you picking out Dever? I mean, it seems like that's the most technical way I could describe it. You're trying to unpack that somehow, because said the word Yad, why don't you say Yad means all of the plagues? Instead, you want to say that it means Dever? Something strange. Says the Netziva Volozhin. And now here we get to the disturbing part, but fasten your seatbelts. Biyad Chazaka zo hadever, says the Netziv, ein hakavana makat dever shehab b'mitzrayim ala behemot. This does not refer to the plague that struck the Egyptians upon their animals. Even though that's the verse that's used here, he says it's only used in order to show us that when it says strong hand, it refers to plague. But don't think that when it quoted this verse to explain that the word hand means dever, that somehow that means the plague of dever. Because why do you single that one out? There are a lot of other very strong plagues we could refer to. Blood, frogs, lice. You keep going. Like dever. Why dever? Rather, he says, Shahare zenichla b'aser makot. That's within the 10 plagues. Ela zeh dever shehaya al Yisrael b'shara choshech. This dever, this plague, is the plague that struck the Jewish people during the plague of darkness. Machmat shehaya kama miYisrael shlo ratzu latzeit ulishtabei tachat omachut shamayim. Because there was a certain number within the Jewish nation who did not want to leave Egypt, and they did not want to subjugate themselves under the yoke of heaven. Umashmaut b'yad chazaka kan ukolashni Chezkel Hanavi. The strong hand here means not in the sense of rescue, but of I am forcing you to be rescued. Al geula atida, what Yechezkel says about the future redemption, im lo v'yad chazaka imloch aleihem. If not, with a strong hand, I will. But with a strong hand, will I rule over them. So I'll tell you what this is because you didn't see that yet. So we'll look it up right now inside. What's this referring to? So this is the description in the Torah of the plague of darkness, right? We learn that there was a 3-day darkness, right? It was a 3 days of very heavy darkness. Rashi here quotes various ideas about this. This is extremely dark darkness. It goes through a little description here. It describes 3 days they didn't see each other. Then another 3 days that was an even darker darkness. No one could even move. One sitting could not stand. One standing could not sit. Why did Hashem bring darkness upon them? Answers Rashi, Shayubi Saba Oto Ador B'Shaim. There were wicked people among the Jewish nation. Let's say they didn't want to leave. They died during that 3-day plague of darkness. Why was the plague under darkness? In order to spare the Jewish people the shame that the Egyptians would say, look at that, they're getting pounded with plagues just like we are. Let me pause here before I take any questions and comments just to say one very important thing, which is a caveat I should have said at the beginning. I draw, of course, not a single iota or an ounce of, not even infinitesimal component of linkage between what I'm describing today and what we're undergoing now, for so many different reasons. And I'll just say one of them. We don't have prophets. We simply don't know what is going on now at a time in which we still live in many respects in Hester Panim, with a hiding of the divine countenance. I'm not a prophet. I'm not even the son of prophets, as far as I know. Maybe I'm descended, but I make no bones about not being able to make prognostications, interpret history beyond what the Tanakh tells us about its time and about what Chazal tell us about what to know and to think about and to look for when things happen. The one thing we do have, of course, is that we're not meant to let a good crisis go to waste. That's said somewhat glibly, perhaps, but that's actually what the Rambam writes in Hilchot Ta'aniyot. He paskins this, the halacha: a person should not view calamity as happenstance, should not chalk it up to nothing. You want to call it a test or a punishment or whatever it is for yourself. That's your interpretation. But certainly, a person should ask the question in the iteration of Rav Soloveitchik based on that Rambam, not why is this happening, but rather, what can I do now to respond? How can I improve myself? What can I be doing in a better way? Okay, so that's just now back to this story where actually we do have prophets who did tell us actually things that happened and why they did. Rashi here, very obviously, he was not a prophet, by the way.
Helen wanted to say something.
Okay, can I just finish the sentence? It makes a very, very important claim that actually here, there was something against the Jewish people in Mitzrayim, but it was hidden away under darkness. Lori, go ahead. Sorry about that. And who else was waiting?
Not me. I was just telling you,
Helen.
I think Helen's trying to say something.
Oh, Helen, go ahead. Sorry, Helen,
Okay.
Go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to say I disagree with this. Why? First of all, I understand from Habor Reik Ein Bo Mayim. I've abused that poor Rashi many times when you have two different things, Avol Yesh Nechoshim V'Akrabim. So Zrona Tiyov Yad Chazakah are telling us two different things. But in the movie of 10 Commandments, Edward G. Robinson, the Russia, is there. So when you're talking about evil people being destroyed, and now I don't know how far fictionally afield the 10 Commandments are, but we do know about people who were Russians who are in the picture of the Exodus.
Right. So the movie The 10 Commandments is pretty far afield. I'll say it straight. It's pretty far afield. But notwithstanding that, you're quite right that there is even a broader story here, because wait a second, according to this Rashi, the way Rashi would have it, whoever's wicked was sort of like wiped away before they got out of Egypt, right? That's what it sounds like it's saying. Yet, and I know I love that you're quoting the Charlton Heston film, but we do know that clearly not everybody who was wicked, so to speak, in the Jewish nation was left on the side. And by the by, don't we have a wicked son at the Seder and we say you should come with us? We don't say, right? Mind you, we do kind of say, had he been there, he'd not have been redeemed.
There's different wickedness.
Maybe just because you're going to be wicked in the future or you've done some bad stuff doesn't mean that you don't believe that that you don't want to leave Egypt. It seems to me that this is the plague is on those who are content with being in Egypt and just don't see why they have to leave. And so you could be wicked in a million other ways, but you don't want to leave Egypt.
That's right. That's right. And that's one of the things we're about to see inside as well, that it's not monolithic. We know the world is so much more complicated than just saying there is evil somewhere and we'll just get rid of it, right? I always think of this idea, that the whole point of the flood was to vanquish evil. I mean, of that generation, but it wasn't really to vanquish evil entirely. It was just, it had reached a breaking point that was not salvageable, but it wasn't actually going to remove evil from the world. Within the Jewish nation, that generation, there were Rishayim. And what was their wickedness? They didn't want to leave. That was their wickedness. It doesn't mean that they had a lock on all wickedness in the world and there was no other wickedness afterward, or maybe even as they were leaving, right? But just to consider what that means, that the Netziv says, what is the Yad Chazaka of Yisro Natuya? It's a hint. The words Yad Chazaka here is the Dever. Now, here's again from the Netziv. It's a bit of an essay, but I thought it was important to see it inside because it just opens a new window into seeing more nuance about the complexity of a Jewish people who, notwithstanding the fact that there was a much more variegated picture of who composed the Jewish nation, notwithstanding the fact that there were righteous people and less righteous people, to put it charitably. They weren't the wicked people who stayed in Egypt, who died in the plague of darkness, but it's a much more of a mixed bag of who actually comprised the Jewish people. And yet we celebrate, and yet we came out, and yet we're one people, and yet we celebrate unity and, but even though we know on this other channel, it's more complicated than we would imagine it to have been when we're kids and we hear like the Jewish people have been marched out in lockstep and there were no levels and gradations. And so here's what the Netziv says. He says, this is a pasuk in Parshat Va'etchanan, but it's missing, in the pasuk it misses the words of Yisro Natuya. And we have to understand, L'mai hosif bal hagad of Yisro Natuya. Why is that added? It's to add to the power of the Exodus. Then it should have kept going and describe the mightiness, the signs, the wonders. It must be that this addition of these two little words, uvizro and atuya, such as they are, seemingly superfluous because they don't actually fit in the pasuk. In other words, if you're going to put extra superlatives explaining the way in which Hashem took the Jewish people out, so don't stop with Yad Chazaka Yisro Natuya. So add otot moftim, say the whole line, say more things. Why do you contain it with just those two things? Yad Chazaka Yisro Natuya says, because this is the beginning of the story in the manner of starting with deprecation or denigration rather, and finishing with praise. This is really based on the Mechilta of Parshat Beshalach and Parshat Vayosha. Now, the Mechilta is the Medrash Halacha and Sefer Shmot, and it is a work that is of the same time frame as when the Mishnah is written. So, what is Miyad Mitzrayim, taken from the hand of Egypt? That the Jewish nation was like a bird, in the hand of a person, that if the person wants, they could squeeze their hand and kill the bird. And another analogy, second analogy, the image of taking the fetus out from within the mother, the calf, right, from the mother. As it says, to take a nation from the midst of a nation. Hisbir Hatana, what the sage of the Mishnah, who is speaking in the Mechilta here of Rabbi Shmuel, I believe, not of the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but of the Rabbi Shmuel, says explaining Mashakot of Miyad Mitzrayim, that it says from the hand of Egypt, that the Jewish people were saved. It says in the Torah in Parshat Bishal before the song at the sea, Vayosha Hashem b'yom et Yisrael Miyad Mitzrayim, from the hand of Egypt. Why are you mentioning the hand? To conjure this image of the the person holding a bird that it could squeeze and kill anytime, God forbid. It's not to show God is stronger than Egypt, that we already know, but rather the Jewish people were like that little bird. In this manner, it's not going to be helpful if the stronger man hits the weaker man over the head, because even the weaker man, he's already holding the bird in his hand. He's not going to let the bird go. He's going to squeeze the bird. So umishum she'im yireh ha'ochez leinatzam b'yad makeu. If the one holding says, I'm not going to be saved from the one who's hitting me, halu yidchok et atzibu b'yado v'yechanka. He'll strangle the bird. So the stronger one beating the weaker one, right? God beating up on Egypt, they'll still kill all the Jews, God forbid. Kacha lo haya makam shilu hamakot shnitan leparol mitzrayim sheyotziu et Yisrael shay b'yadam haya la'abed v'larog et Yisrael b'pam achat. The whole nation lived in one place at one time, and therefore the Egyptians still had, between plagues, the opportunity, thank God they didn't carry it out, to engage in genocide. The sages teach, Hoshaya, Tzidkot Pir Zono b'Yisrael, Tzedakah asa Kadosh Baruch Hu b'Yisrael, shepizron ben ha'umot, a great righteousness did Hashem do for the Jewish people to spread us out among the nations so that we are never all in one place at one time, in case we're persecuted. Lo aleinu, happens too many times in history. But in Egypt, it wasn't that way because we were all in one place. V'im ken, and if so, kasha hayalahotzit Yisrael kshein chayim. It was harder to get the Jewish people out while they were still alive. The Jewish people were saved by Hashem from the hand of Egypt. Now watch this. The second element, Amar Od Rabota, another element. It is good and pleasant for the mighty man to save the captive from the one who is the captor in a manner that the captive actually wants to leave. Should have underlined that line as well. It's not the same thing if the captive, however, wants to stay. If the captive identifies with the captor. It's like a person who decides to start beating the animal to get the calf, to the baby, to be delivered. It's not going to help. Why? Even the fetus doesn't want to leave. The mighty person through sticks cannot beat the animal to get the baby out. It doesn't work that way. So was the Jewish nation. There were thousands and tens of thousands of Jews, says the Netziv of Volozhin, who did not want to leave. There were people who were rich. There were people who actually had positions in the government. The masses of Jews did not work for the masses of Egyptians, but for the kingdom. Get a ton of Torah Kohanim, as it says later on, Medrash Shalach over Sefer Vayikra, in Parsha Bahar, Miot Lahem Avadim, that they should not have for themselves slaves, V'lo Avadim La'avadim. Al Kain. Therefore, Harbei Shemanu v'Yashiru, Uvehafkerim Chutz Shamayim. There were many people who were appointed, who were rich, and they actually had nothing to do and did not want to be under the yoke of heaven. They didn't want to serve God. They didn't want to have Torah. They didn't want to have service of God. The Jewish people were taken out by Hashem. And indeed, on account of these two possible obstacles. And what are those two obstacles? Number one, the Jewish people are like a bird in the hand of their oppressor. Number two, they're like the fetus in the womb that needs to be delivered. In both cases, no external force, one external force can cause their demise. The other external force is not going to help in a process about which they are already ambivalent. The curative for both of these are in the words Yad Chazaka Zrona Tuya. Hainu. Yad Chazaka is a hadever. Yad Chazaka, that's the plague. As we saw in its place. Well, we will see. This is the beginning of his Haggadah. So later on, and that's the plague of darkness. Shekavana mitira davar adever shaya bisa b'shloshet yemei afela. Lechalot hakotzim b'Yisrael, to remove the thorns in the Jewish nation. Shaya menia v'siba liyetziat kol ha'uma. They were preventing the nation from leaving. Uvizroin etuya, with an outstretched hand. Hu ha'etza neged hachshash harishon. That was to forestall the first concern. The idea of the Egyptians could have been to take counsel and decide, you know what, let's just finish them now. One fell swoop. That's what it means, that Zroa Natuya, later on in the Haggadah, is a sword. What sword? The sword Davka, that's protecting the Jewish people. This is his explanation. So what we're seeing here is really an astounding idea that the Netziv propounds, that actually there is a lot of ambivalence that's going on for the Jewish nation, and that in point of fact, there is also a concern about the insecurity and instability of the Jewish people, even as the plagues are already falling on Egypt, and therefore they need to be protected by Hashem with an outstretched arm. That is the sword that is protecting them. The Netziv goes further. That's what the words Avadim Hayinu Lefaro means. We weren't just slaves in Mitzrayim; we were slaves to Paro. Leparo Hayinu V'lo Avadim Levanu. We were not slaves to slaves. El Leparo HaMelech. We were slaves to Paro himself. Al Kain Hayub Kirbenu Kamish Loratz Latzei L'Kabel M'chut Shamayim. Do you know who I'm a slave of? And people were taking pride in being slaves. V'chein Mefurash B'Shmuel gives you a pasuk to back this idea up. In Mitzrayim, we were all in one place. Not like our exiles, we were all over the world. All in one place in Egypt. It was a great fear. So here you have, we were slaves to Paro in Egypt, means people who didn't want to leave. Secondly, in Egypt, as opposed to all around different places, disparate places, we were everyone was in the same boat at the same time. And nonetheless, Hashem Mitzrayim biyad chazaka cheref miniyah harishona, to countervail the first obstacle, the internal obstacle, the ambivalence on a national level. Do we really want to leave? Do we really want to go? Uvizroa Natuya, with an outstretched arm, cheref chashash hasheni. With the outstretched arm, that's the sword, that's protecting against the second concern about the fact that everyone's in one place. Akein hosif amagid, uvizroa Natuya, lichlo b'zehat chalash nei ofanim. We have both of these elements. Matchi begnut u'mesayim b'shvach. What's the gnut? Hainu gnut, aleph. The first one is shirachokim hayinu kokach me'avodat Hashem. That's what it means. We're on the 49th level of Tuma. Shayinu mesukayim b'mitzrayim b'ratzon. We were in Egypt. Stockholm syndrome, Mitzrayim syndrome. We were happy to be there now. Ke'uber me'imo, like the fetus in the mother's womb. You have to come with a strong hand to rule over us. We should remember it now. The Netziv lives at the end of the 19th century. Communism is not yet obviously reigning, but certainly the assimilationist forces have reached Eastern Europe. Many Jews, like even now, there are many Jews who say, what? A future redemption? Not for me. But in the end, God will rule over us with a strong hand. The second denigration, we were in such grave danger that we could have been wiped away, lo aleinu, in one fell swoop. In addition to the 10 plagues, there was another element, which is an outstretched arm throughout, protecting the Jewish people miraculously from the plague against us that could have been brought against us by the Egyptians of genocide. He wrote this the end of the 19th century. We should remember even today, in many places, we're in great danger in exile, but Hashem's hand is outstretched upon us with wondrous providence. Right there, you can have a discussion at your Seder, depending who's there and who's not there, about what that means, after the Shoah. But that's what it describes. Yeah, how do we make sense of that in this formulation? Or maybe you could say the fact there were Jews in different places. All of this is necessary for the purpose of the Haggadah. Ava betorah sheba oto mikra litshuva chacham ma'idud v'achukim v'gomer lo ba b'tshuva ela al pi shehutzrach hakadosh baruch hu hotzi b'yad chazaka v'lo shayach klal mamar zorah netuya shat l'sham kasher yavur od lefaneinu b'seder chacham. He says, I'll explain it later why zorah netuya doesn't appear in the text of the psukim of the question and the answer given to the Ben Chacham in the Torah. When the Torah says it doesn't have the word zorah netuya, that was not necessary. But the Yad Chazaka part was. He says, I'll explain it later. We won't get to that tonight. Now, the Zroa, that's so end unit 1. Now, the elements that come out of unit 1. Zroa Netuya, outstretched arm. That's the sword. Look at the proof text for the sword. And here, everyone who has been a fellow traveler in Shmuel Bet, you're an expert. As it says, V'charbo shlufa biyada Netuya al Yerushalayim. His sword is stretched out in his hand, outstretched over Yerushalayim. Where's that from? Well, we learned it very recently in the Koren Tanakh. It's the plague in the time of David HaMelech. This is the version in Divrei Hayamim, not the version in the book of Shmuel, but the parallel version in Divrei Hayamim. David says to God, it's very painful to me. Let me fall into the hand of Hashem. He has great mercy, and I don't want to fall into the hand of a person. Hashem puts a plague upon the Jewish people. If you were here for all those sessions, we talked about what the reasons might be, but some of those reasons, many of those reasons have to do with culpability, either of the Jewish people entirely, the Jewish culpability of David HaMelech, some admixture thereof, of other people who did things. And then we have here, Vayishlach Elokim malach liYerushalayim lahashchita. Hashem sent an angel to Yerushalayim to destroy it. Hashchit ra'a Hashem. And as it was destroying, God saw, Vayinachem al hara'ah, he relented. Vayomer l'malach ha'mashchit, Rav ata, it's too much for you, you've overstepped kind of thing. Heref yadecha, stay your hand. Umalach Hashem, omeid im goren arnana yavusi. The angel of God was, as it were, standing at the place of the threshing floor of this person named Arnan, sometimes called Aravna or Arona, somewhere in that family, the Jebusite. So right there, where is that spot? We know where that spot is. It's what we daven toward every day in direction of Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, Har HaBayit, and the place of the Makom HaMikdash, Sheyibana b'meher b'yameinu. That's the Goren Arana. That's what it was there. Vayisa David et einav, vayardam et malach Hashem omeid bein haaretz uvein hashamayim, v'charbo shlufa b'yado, netuya al Yerushalayim. And he saw that its sword was drawn and outstretched upon Yerushalayim. And they fell down on their faces there in their sackcloth. Vayomer David el ha'elokim, Halo ani amarti limnot ba'am, v'ani hu asher chatati, v'arei arioti, ve'ela hatzon me'asu. I, says David to Hashem, David HaMelech says, I wanted to count the people. I sinned. Do something to me. But these sheep, this flock, this beautiful people who I love so much, what did they do wrong? Hashem Elokai, tihi na yadcha bi, strike your hand against me, uveit avi, in my father's house, uva'amcha lo l'magefa. But don't make a plague within the nation. Just these psukim right here. And for those who were with us for all our learning that we did, most recently it was a 4-part series called The First Coronavirus. If you weren't part of it then and you want to see it now, 4 sessions. We talked about this plague. But look at the greatness of a David HaMelech, Master of the Universe, it's really on me. Regardless if the sin was because of me and that's why this thing happened, this plague happened, or whether it was the sin of the people or some admixture thereof. But at Ribono Shel Olam, I love my fellow Jews. And I love the Jewish people. I call them the holy flock, the flock of Hashem. What did they do wrong? Put it on me. That pasuk is the pasuk that is used as the proof text for Zohar Cherev. Now, the Netziv had explained Zohar Cherev as the sword that Hashem used to protect the Jewish people, the threat of it. He goes on to say elsewhere in his Haggadah that it's I didn't give you that section. He's a sword outstretched where selectively the people who might have had the idea to formulate Lo Aleinu, some kind of Wannsee conference, would mysteriously die before they could enact their plan and advise Paro to engage in a genocide. That's the Cherev, isn't it? It was held over Egypt. even between the plagues. It was like this miraculous protection of the Jewish people. But I'm actually wondering if I could say bold, I hope it's not too bold, too chutzpahdik, but the fact that the pasuk that's being used here is, and his sword was stretched out in his hand, stretched out over Yerushalayim, is not in and of itself a formulation of the Baal HaHaggadah, the one who wrote the Haggadah, putting in Uvizro and Atuya. And what does Zro and Atuya mean? It means that the Jewish people in Yerushalayim have to be very careful. It means that we're reading the Haggadah in exile after there was a destruction of Yerushalayim. And what do we learn nonetheless? That David HaMelech is still saying to Hashem, what did these people do wrong? What is the result of this story? The Malach of Hashem says to God, say the following to David, from the crisis of this plague, build for me a new Mizbeach. Vayal David bidvar Gad, asher diber b'shem Hashem. And David went up in the following the directive from God as Hashem had spoken, and the rest of the story, Ayin Sham, the building of a Mizbeach right there in Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh, the first one that is built there. I appreciate the direct message. Someone just telling me about culpability and Yosef, maybe with the Egyptians, that's like a whole different line. That's a whole different line. Maybe not. I don't want to, that's opening another door. We can't open it today. I won't have time. So thanks for your comment. I'm moving past it just for want of time today. I want to stay focused on this that we're up to here. Although it's an interesting idea. You have here this idea that the cherev maybe is also part of the Gnut. Netziv wanted to see it in a more positive light, the salvation of the Jewish people. But maybe Zohar Cherev means that there is some kind of a warning that, in fact, the Jewish people, lo aleinu, if we don't behave the right way, if there are sins by leadership, sins by the laity, doesn't matter who, sins by the populace, by the general populace, the Jewish people, lo aleinu, there's an element here of a chaber shlufa b'yana to Yerushalayim. By the by, even though there was threat, what came of it in the end? A new relationship with Hashem, the building of a new Mizbeach, the going up to Yerushalayim and putting the Mizbeach there. If you look further along in your Haggadah, you'll find that by the time we get to the Birkat HaGeula, the blessing on redemption, at the end of it, at the end of the section of Magid, that actually does reference that we're hoping to build a Mizbeach for you, Hashem, even though we don't have one now, we don't have the Korban Pesach, but we're hoping that we'll one day have it again. I think it is intrinsically related to this story that is being quoted here. And of course, if you were in those courses, those 4 sessions, you got a lot to say at the meal. Don't say during Magid, it'll take too long. Okay. The Medrash Shalach and Sefer Bamidbar Parshat Shlach, at the end of Parshat Shlach, I didn't give you the psukim, probably should have, but at the end of the Parsha, Ani Hashem Elokeichem, I am Hashem your God who took you out of Egypt, right? The last section of Parshat Shlach, the Parshat Tzitzit. But it already says, in the pasuk, it says, Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liot lachem elokim, and the last 3 words of the parsha are Ani Hashem Elokeichem. If you go to shul, you hear Hashem Elokeichem emet, but it's Ani Hashem Elokeichem is really the end of the parsha. The word emet was just added into the siddur. So Ani Hashem Elokeichem od lama ne'amar havelo kvar ne'amar Ani Hashem Elokeichem asher hotzeti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim. Why did it say again a second time, I'm Hashem your God? Yeah. So the Jewish people, why did it say a second time? Kedei shelo yehu Yisrael omrim pnei matzi vanu amakom lo shanasev and he told schar lo sim v'lo notlim schar. Then Hamar Hebrew say lo miduv shov lo mi oktso. I don't want the honey. I don't want the sting. So I don't want reward. You gave us commandments. We're going to get reward for doing the commandments. I don't want the reward, and I don't want to do the commandments. This is the same. In case the Jews would say that, the Jewish people said to Yechezkel that people came from the elders of the Jewish people and they sat before me and they spoke to me. Right? What did they say? Says the Medrash. Amrulo, they said to Yechezkel, Evet shemacho rabo lo yatzim rishuto. If a slave was sold, Yechezkel, remember, lives in Bavel. He's part of the Babylonian exile. The elders means the exiled elders from Israel. They come to see Yechezkel, the Navi. They say to him, if there's a slave and the slave was sold off by the master, haven't those slaves left their master's domain and dominion? Amar lahem, hint, that is true. Amru lo. So they said to him, Yechezkel, hoil umecharanu hamakom le'umar ha'olam yatzana mirishuto. If the truth is that we've been sold into slavery because now we're slaves to Nebuchadnezzar, so we're no longer, God sold us away from him. Amar lehem hari evet shemachro rabba amanat lachzor shema yatsa chutz l'rishuto. So he said to them, it's true, you were sold into slavery, as it were, handed over to be slaves to someone else, but it's for the sake of bringing you back. Amanat lachzor is not actually a real sale, is not left from the original owner. Va'olal ruchachem haya lo tiyeh asher atem omrim niyeh kagoy m'sher sivotenu v'chumishbehochod hadamal asher eitz ve'even chai. Sorry, I read too much. But basically, do you think that you will be able to say, let's be like all of the nations of the world that are in our midst, like the families of the earth, to serve wood and stone? Chai ani neum Hashem, by my life, says God. Im lo b'yad chazaka uvizroa netuya. Sound familiar? With a strong hand and an outstretched arm, uvechema shfucha, and with poured out wrath, emloch aleichem. So I underlined too much here. Let me take that back. We just need this part here. Yeah? If not with a strong hand and outstretched arm, that we know very well. I'll say parenthetically, what is with outstretched, with poured out fury, will I rule over you? Hashem says, I will rule over you with poured out fury. Where are the words poured out fury at our Seder? For those who know it very well, when do we say something about pouring out fury or wrath? Anyone remember? After benching, after Birkat Hamazon, we stand up, we open the front door, we have a cup of wine, it's a cup for Eliyahu. What do we say? Shvo chamat el hagoyim asher lidavcha. Pour out your wrath, not on us, on the nations of the world that don't know about you. Now, it's not wrath for the sake of punishment, right? It's wrath like uvechem eshvuchem loch aleichem. That's what Yechezkel is telling the people. Says the Medrash, the Sifri, what is beyond? Now it looks like we're reading our Haggadah. Now we're like someone in the middle of his Medrash and Parshat Shlach. Biyad chazaka zo hadever, k'mo shenemar hine yad Hashem hoyav mikacha shebasadeh uvizro netuya zo hacherev, k'ma shenemar v'chai bo shlufa biyad netuya Yerushalayim. Do you understand what's going on here? You see what happened here? I hope I didn't lose you. But these words are the exact words in the Haggadah, Shal Pesach. And these words here, the word dever, certainly does not mean the dever of the 10 plagues. Because the word Yad Chazaka here is explaining the words from the book of Yechezkel. And what's the explanation? Oh, that's a plague. Oh, and what's Zroa Netuya? Oh, well, that's a sword outstretched over Yerushalayim. Right? And then the third one, Uvechem Shfucha Zu Rav, the third one is with poured out fury or wrath of some sort as well. That is a famine. And by the way, when therefore do we say Shvo Chamad Chalagoyim Shalidaucha? On a full stomach. After we finished eating, after Birkat Hamazon, after. Okay, now we're saying pour out your wrath. What's that pouring out the wrath? Bring famine somewhere else. Bring hunger over there, right? Don't bring hunger on us. We have a full stomach now. Achashani mevi aleichem shlosh puraniyot halalu zu achar zu. After I pour out these three things against you, I will rule over you even against your will. Therefore, it says again, Ani Hashem Elokechem. So the last verse of all of the three paragraphs of Shema, which is taken from Parshat Shlach, Ani Hashem Elokechem Asher Hotzei Etchem Eretz Mitzrayim Liot Lachem Elokim. Ani Hashem Elokechem. That's the end of it. I gave you here the whole chapter. I don't have time to see the whole thing inside. If you want to look it up for yourself, Yechezkel chapter 20 retells the story of the exile and the redemption in a less than flattering light, unfortunately. I told you to give up all of the idols you had in Egypt. Don't defy yourselves. But what happened? You rebelled against me. You did not want to listen. Everybody kept that which was the abomination of their eyes. They didn't send it away. And the abominations of Egypt, they did not abandon. And I said, I will pour out my wrath upon them in order to have my anger against them, even in the land of Egypt. I did this for my namesake, so that it will not be by the eyes of the non-Jews of the nations whose midst they are. So I didn't do it. Basically, I did for my namesake. I did not do this entirely that I said I was going to do to destroy those who are engaged in idolatry, et cetera, because of the non-Jews who were there, namely the Egyptians. Does this sound familiar? This is what Rashi is telling us. This is, I believe, hinted at here in these psukim themselves. So I took them out of Egypt, and what happened? And now this is, by the way, Dvar Torah for Parshat Kitisa this week. You'll find these words practically. These, I took them out of Egypt. I took them to the Midbar. I gave them my edicts, my statutes. I relayed to them. They should do it and live by them. I gave them my Shabbases to be a sign between me and them. Everybody knows B'Shem B'nai Yisrael Shabbat from Kiddush, from the Siddur. It's in Parshat Kitisa. So I gave them this, and to be a sign between me and them, to know that I'm Hashem their God who sanctifies them. And what did the Jewish people do? They rebelled against me in the Midbar. They did not follow what I said. And what did I say I was going to do? Again, I thought perhaps I am going to strike out against them, to pour my wrath out against them, to destroy them. But for the sake of my name, because of the non-Jewish nations that I took them out before, I decided not to do this. So I gave them a reprieve. I brought them to the land filled with milk and honey. It goes on and on and on and on. Yeah. And then the next generation didn't listen. I mean, this is a real indictment, but of course, where are the Jewish people when they're hearing this? It's the elders of the Jewish people coming to appeal in some way to Yechezkel, saying, hey, we're off the hook. Like, our relationship with God is broken. And Yechezkel tells them, do you know how many times it could have been broken? And how many times it was not broken? How many times you went really over the line? Since I give you a reprieve, I give you a reprieve, I give you a reprieve. And there's, again, if we had the time to go through it, we're running out of time here, but if the whole thing again and again and again. Therefore, you should let them know they're not going to get away with it. And that's the end of the whole chapter is, after everything else, right? Do you think, we read these psukim already, do you think, did it come into your mind that you think we're just going to say, like, we'll be like all the other nations of the world and we'll just be like everybody else. We'll serve wood and stone. It'll be fine. Says Hashem, Chai ani neum Hashem Elokim, im lo biyad chazak v'zron atu v'chem esfuchem lo chalechem. Same words again. Yeah. Yad chazaka v'zron atu. You see these expressions coming again and again. And in this context, it is a critique. Just have a few minutes left. So I'll do, in closing, something that I would say is a little warmer. All this has been very heavy, but something that you can say that'll leave people with, I think, maybe some measure of smile or some warm feeling. I just think it's such a beautiful piece. And it goes like this. When the Jewish people left Egypt, it says, V'chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael eretz Mitzrayim. They left chamushim. In English, chamushim would be armed. That's the best way to describe it. They were armed. They had supplies. And Rashi says this, that they were armed. It gives you a whole explanation. But then Rashi says something that I have continuously found incredibly troubling. And I basically, if you just read Rashi on its own, it's just mind-boggling to me. Don't ask me, how does this work out, Rabbi? I've never worked it out. I'm admitting b'fem malei. But I content myself with saying it's a medrash. It's not literally meant to tell us something literal, a literal truth. It's teaching us some idea. Chamushim is milashon, not only chamush, but milashon chamesh, 5. So the second opinion, davar acher, chamushim means echad michamisha yatzu. Only 1/5 the Jewish people left. 4/5 of the Jewish nation died in the time period of darkness, referenced that we talked about earlier in the plague. I don't really understand that. If you start doing the math, it's just mind-boggling to me. Either we have absolutely no understanding of what the world population really was like in those days, or there was some astronomical sum of Jewish people. I don't understand it. And also the computation for me also starts running into a theological question of, like, I thought all the Jews were on a very low level. 4/5 of them were so terrible they couldn't even come out. So we just got this little remnant. Hayitachen. It's just very hard for me to swallow until I came across the words of the Be'er Yosef. The Be'er Yosef of Yisrael Misalant of Yerushalayim. And he explains, Yosef Zundel Misalant actually, who explains the following on this pasuk. He says that when you look at two of the earliest interpretations, the Aramaic interpretations of this verse, it mentions in the Targum Yonatan ben Uziel, it says everybody had 5 children. Everybody who left Egypt, chamushim, it means that everyone left with 5 children from the land of Egypt. You have this also in Targum Yonatan and Parshat Bo, same thing. When it says 600,000 men who could go out to war, that was accepting the kids. And he explained that is accepting the 5 children, 5 for each man. Every man who left of the 600,000 had 5 kids with him. The Targum Yerushalmi says, what is mizuyanin? They were armed. They were not armed with weapons. They were armed with good deeds. Be'uvda tava saliku b'nei Yisrael, periki me'ar Mitzrayim. They had good deeds with them. The Targum, the Ber Yosef, we don't have time to read it. It's like 2 pages long, and we're totally out of time. Let me just tell you what it says very, very briefly. The Ber Yosef basically says the following. The mention here of the Chamushim alu b'nei Yisrael Eretz Mitzrayim, and how do we reconcile all these different parts? He says that whatever the number was of how many people died in the plague, the people who died in that plague during the time period of darkness, they were grown-ups. They weren't kids. No kids died in that plague. The kids were not held accountable. If the kid was a Rashas, it was a little kid. It didn't matter. They were not of age. But the grown-ups who died, every grown-up who died left children. Now those children were orphaned. This pasuk means that the Jewish people, every Jewish family, took in 5 children. That the Jewish people leaving Egypt were leaving Egypt. Each family had someone else's family's kids with them. And that this pasuk is not a practical pasuk. It's not an indicting pasuk. It's celebrating the great, unbelievable chesed that the Jewish people did for each other. In loco parentis, someone else said, I will be the av. I will be the aim. I will take responsibility for Jewish children. If they're not my children personally, that is of no moment. Vikan haben shoel. Here, the child will ask. My child, another child, the Jewish children will ask. Who will answer then? Kan aviv malamdo. The father has to teach. The parent has to teach. And what's one of the greatest acts of teaching? Doing. And what's that? Taking in someone else's kids. This description here, again, I'm telling you 2 pages in 3 minutes flat. I got 2 minutes on the clock, literally. Right? What are these? And here he actually writes down here, and that's why I thought it was so pointed, because it's exactly like David HaMelech is saying about the Jewish people. Atzon mechat, like what did these do? What did the sheep do? What did the livestock, meaning the Jewish people? So Ava hayeladim shel eila harishayim nishar b'chaim. The children stayed alive. Ki eila hatzon aktanim haolim v'yonkim. These were babies. It was suckling infants. Why should they die in Egypt? These portions here, 4/5, these are all little kids. There are no children left. Not one hoof was left behind, let alone one child. In came to each one of these children, these 4 parts. Again, if it's 4/5, again, mind-boggling to me. The 5th that was left took in all the kids Yatzim Mitzrayim. Said, you're my child now, I will raise you. They said, we'll take you out of Mitzrayim together, we will not leave you alone here. In addition to one's own children, they took 4 families worth of children from these children who died, from the parents rather who died. And you find here that every Jew, therefore, had 5 children, means 5 families, their own family, and 4 other families worth of children. And therefore, they are mizuyanim, they have weaponry. It's not weaponry. The weaponry is that they have this chesed they did. They have children who they have now living in their household, who sadly, whatever the reason was, their parents died, doesn't matter now. What matters is these are Jewish children, and I'm responsible for them. That, says Rabbi Sami Salant, was the greatest act of chesed. And he goes on to say, this is exactly what it must mean. When the prophet Yirmiyahu, he says it down here, when the prophet Yirmiyahu will say the Jewish people had a very terrible time for Jewish people. Zacharti la chesed ne'urayich. I remember the kindness of your youth. What does it mean? Not just to the Jewish people. He says, Rashi says that it means the kindness of the youth. The Jewish people was a youthful people. And we went out into the desert. They went out into the desert, which is a land that was not sown. Why? Because they believed in Hashem. Because Moshe and Aaron said it'll be okay. They said, okay, it'll be okay. It says Risami Salant, chesed ne'urayich does not mean the kindness of you, the Jewish people, as a youthful people, but rather, that they went, even though they had no food. Excuse me. But what I wrote here, They also took within the nation, they took from the families and the children of their brethren who had passed away. And the sages teach that we should explain chesed ni'urayich, meaning the chesed that you did with the children. Klal Yisrael, ni'urayich, the children of Klal Yisrael. And that's what it means. And therefore, even if you're living through a period of plague, the sense of being able to have a sense of co-fraternity and responsibility beyond oneself, beyond one's own Dalet Amot, to be able to go to the next generation, to see that there's responsibility and there are things that we need to do and things we need to think about in terms of our own relationship with the Jewish children of the world, whether it's supporting Jewish education, whether it's a child who may not biologically be your child at the table. Maybe it's a relative, an extended relative who is very far away from Judaism. Okay, so that's what it means. Chamushim, the Jewish people did this unbelievable chesed to make sure that they weren't just looking after their own family, but the families of all of Klal Yisrael and their children, and hence that focus at our Leil HaSeder. Okay, we saw a lot of different ideas today. We're done for today. Join me next week.
2 questions.
I'm happy to take questions. I
At
want
the
to let everyone
beginning,
know who has to go. So if you want to hang up, you can hang up. You want to stay on to ask questions, be my guest. Okay, go.
2 questions. First, thank you very much. At the very beginning, you mentioned that we don't ask why, we rather look how to respond. Can you elaborate on it? And question number 2 is, how can I get the image of the last piece of paper that you talked about in the last 3 minutes?
So the Al Rishon, there are essays on the subject. I gave you the one sentence. To ask the question why is a question that ultimately does not have a satisfactory answer for us as human beings. It's the question of Eov. Why are bad things happening to me? Why does it have to be that way? Asking God. In the end, Hashem's answer is, and Karen mentioned this, I think on Monday, where were you when I made the world? How do you will not understand all the different dynamics over here. It's not going to be satisfactory. So to ask the question, it just reverberates as a question. But to ask the question, okay, something happened. What do I do now? How can I respond? How can I enrich my life, enrich someone else's life? What can I do to make meaning even out of suffering and a terrible time? There's a lot to say about it. It's like sha'ot, like I'm saying in one sentence.
Is that what you mean, to reread the same letters with different vowels instead of the question lama? You read it as lema?
Nachon,
okay.
Nachon.
Okay.
This is like a drush that people always have on this idea, but it's a little bit like reducing it to one line, one sentence, one word, but really it's essays and essays. If you look online, you probably find essays from Rav Yosef Dovalevi Soloveitchik has essays on this subject. There's a book called Out of the Whirlwind where he talks about it, essays on Jewish suffering and mourning and suffering. There's many of his writings, Kol Dodido Fake, the essay Kol Dodido Fake, The Voice of My Beloved Knocks, where he talks about evil there, and various other places. But this is sort of the line that I come from, the Masorah, my Rebbeim who learned from Rav Soloveitchik. So this is sort of how I've been steeped, if you will. To try to find the answer is just mind-boggling, and we're not able to.
The second thing, how can I get?
Yeah, the Shiur notes, the form, the source pack and everything will be uploaded to a website. I had no other name for it, so I gave it my name because I didn't know what else to call it. RabbiTzviEngel.org. I put.
Okay, I like this.
Yeah, you can download it.
Very many videos. It's really good.
Wow, there's more here from the Rabbi Salmi Salami. Just we ran out of time, so that's it. I want to wish everyone Chag Kasher v'Sameach.
Rabbi.
Yes, Helen, please.
One more. Okay, another support of my Farah field. Yod Chazaka could be justice, but we always have to remember Zroa Nutuya, that even for the Jews and the Egyptians, God always has mercy tempered for his justice. And in Yiddish, we always say, you should give tzedakah with an open hand. And so always we temper the justice with mercy.
Okay. Worthy of consideration. We're out of time, so I don't want to give it too much consideration now, but we'll have to get back to it. I wish everyone all the best, and just Chag Kasher v'Sameach. Talk soon.